The next principle of animation is that of staging. Staging deals a lot with how you present your characters, objects, and scenes to the viewer and how they can interpret it. Take something as simple as this circle in the center of our screen. In one context, I can make it the central point of an action sequence. But I can take that same circle and make it a large part of a background. Or even still, I can make it a really small part of an entire scene. Depending on how you place your objects and stage them within your design, people are going to interpret it very differently. This is why staging, it's an action of presenting an idea so that it's completely and unmistakably clear. The more clear and unmistakable you can make your scene and design, the better you can tell your story through your animations. Essentially, this is an acting sequence. And so understanding how to act and how to set up your scene is really going to help sell and deliver the overall performance. Now, there's 4 main ways that you can stage a good scene to make it understandable and unique and memorable. You can do it through a camera's perspective, through timing, through acting and actions, and then finally in the setting that you set up for your animation. To get clear, good camera staging, try to think of your animations through the lens of a viewfinder on your camera. You want to have as much action be nice and centered within your design so that it's clearly and easily focused upon. Or if you've got a more complex scene and want to make it more artistic, you can have things fall along the 1 or 2/3 dividing mark. This means if you're animating something, don't have it too far off to the side. Move it over towards the center so that it's nice and clearly visible. If you do have a more complex scene with lots of stuff in it, you can still think about it like a painting. Take this for instance. You've got the castle in the very back is nice and dead center within your screen. But the action that Aladdin's having off to the side is on the left 1/3 of the design. This means they're dividing it up and having everything nice and clearly seen, no actions are overlapping, and it's kept very simple. Another way you can use cameras is through close-up or far away. If you want to show emotion or being able to see the reactions of your characters, consider having them close up. However, if you've got more action in a scene and you need to be able to show a lot of different characters, pull your camera away for these larger action sequences so that everything can be seen. Time staging deals with giving your characters and their actions plenty of time to take place before a new action starts. For instance, if 2 characters are having a dialogue, make sure that they both finish saying what they're saying or doing what they need to do before the next action happens. This way it's clearly understood exactly what's going on. Another thing to consider is that you give more time for things that it takes longer to interpret. For instance, if you've got something that needs to be read on screen, in this case they've pulled out a gun that's got some small text to it. You're going to see in a moment that they give it plenty of time on screen to pull it out, notice that you have to read it, and then they give you time to read it before following along with the next action. Especially when dealing with reading, usually they'll give you enough time to read it 3 times on screen so before moving on to the next part of the scene. Action staging deals with posing your characters in a way that clearly demonstrates exactly what they're doing. For instance, let's say you have a script that calls for your character to be eating ice cream. In this case, I've got 2 different drawings that essentially show the same thing. But how do I know which pose most clearly communicates that idea? One trick that a lot of animators do is use a silhouette test. If you were to take both of these drawings and turn them solid black, now you can look at them and say, which one clearly shows that he's eating ice cream? In this case, the first one, option A, simply because the silhouette of him gives a clear indication of exactly what he's doing, whereas the other one is a little bit more ambiguous. So working out your compositions ahead of time to give your characters a good strong pose and a clear silhouette is an excellent way of setting up good action staging. Additionally, think about the camera angle that maximizes exactly who your characters are and what they'll be doing, especially as your camera could be moving around. I especially like this particular silhouette. Notice that it's set up perfectly because I can see the outline of the character's face, so I know exactly who they are, and all of the important objects that are happening within this scene. This gives good, clear staging so that my audience can understand exactly what's going on. And a final way you can have action staging is by exaggerating the actions of your characters. Instead of her being just sad, you can see that she's overly sad by the way her body is reacting, by her facial expressions, in addition to the way the voice would be acting with her dialogue. A final way of staging is by placing your characters in a setting that clearly defines what they're doing and where they're at. Let's say your script calls for Mickey Mouse to be inside of a haunted house. Well, instead of giving them a background setting of a simple, plain house, try to maximize every single area that exaggerates the fact that it's haunted and spooky. So in this case, you can see there's cobwebs in every corner, there's broken holes in the walls, and there's broken furniture and mirrors in the background. Even the very house itself seems to have no straight edges to it. Everything is broken with creaky floors, and there's even a large lock on the door. All of this goes into exaggerating the setting so that it clearly defines and communicates exactly where he's at. And if you were to watch this before he even goes into the house, they show you a picture of the house and try to make it seem like it's a spooky place that he's going to be entering into. This is known as an establishing shot, and it usually happens before the scene takes place. The establishing shot is going to set up the context of a scene, and it shows the relationship between the characters and the important figures and the setting that they're in. In general, these are usually longer shots. It gives you plenty of time to understand where they're at, and they're at the beginning of a scene. They indicate where something happens and sometimes even when something may be taking place. For instance, is it in the past? Is it in night? Is it in day? That sort of thing. The remainder of the scene takes place at that shot, so it establishes where you're at. Some of the most memorable scenes in Disney movies are these long establishing shots. In this case, establishing that it's on the African savannah, or maybe a slow pan down letting you know that you're in Paris, or even just a still shot showing you a vast labyrinth of a library. All of these are ways of setting up and showing you where the actions are going to be taking place based on the setting and the scene that they're in. Some final notes to think about. Staging begins before you do any kind of animated drawing. You need to plan ahead exactly what your scene is so that you can maximize the visual storytelling that you're trying to convey. Also, try to stage your actions one thing at a time. You never want to have two or more important actions happening at the same time because they're going to conflict with the visuals and your attention. You want to be able to show one thing and then another. And then finally, you can remove any unnecessary actions from your scene that may cause a distraction. If something's happening in the background that's big and noisy and boisterous, it's going to take away from your foreground of your main characters and what you're trying to convey. All right, let's do a simple demo that shows you how you can set up staging for your animations.